State lawmakers apologize for a sex scandal, chaos in the presidential race, Dan Gilbert's impact on Detroit, and a little game that we call fill in the blank. Stay put. My week starts right now.
Detroit Public TV is supported by Business Leaders for Michigan, announcing open registration for the Michigan CEO Summit, November 12th at the Westin Book Cadillac Detroit. Keynote speaker is Tom Kelly, leader of a global design firm helping organizations innovate and grow. Motivational speakers, networking opportunities, and creative inspiration. That's the Business Leaders for Michigan CEO Summit, November 12th at the Westin Book Cadillac. Info at businessleadersformichigan.com/events. Funding is also provided by Delta.
Hey there, and welcome to My Week. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Christy McDonald. All eyes on Lansing this week for the dramatic and sometimes cringeworthy testimony to determine if State Reps Todd and Cindy Gamrat should keep their jobs. They both apologized for their affair, for misconduct in office, for bad management, and they don't want to be kicked out. Is it too little, too late? Coming up, we will debate what should happen to the two lawmakers. Plus, we'll look at the next big thing on the agenda up there in Lansing, roads, we hope. Also, there's a shakeup in the Democratic presidential race. We'll talk about Hillary's fall from the top. Plus, the Republicans get ready for another debate. Also, Dan Gilbert moves his rehab efforts into Detroit neighborhoods. We'll take a look at the impact he is having on the city. And we're going to play a little game where I'll ask Nolan and Stephen to fill in the blank about stories in this week's headlines. It's the best game show that you've never seen before. But we do start in Lansing tonight, where Todd and Cindy Gamrat are telling their sides of the story to a special House committee. Both say they should be censured and not expelled for the botched attempt to cover up their affair. As of our taping time, the committee has not yet made its recommendation, and that is where we start tonight with our My Week contributors Nolan Finley of the Detroit News and Stephen Henderson of the Detroit Free Press. Hey guys, there's nothing I like more than sitting down to read an 833-page report on Todd and Cindy Gamrat. Did you guys read this?
Not all 833 pages.
No. Did you scan through it just a little bit?
A little bit.
All right,
it's
so
like, search, right? Find and search.
You just look
for certain words.
You look for the sexy
I
parts.
look for the dirty words.
And is that how it went? See, this is maybe what's wrong with the entire situation. All right, so what do you think of the testimony so far that we've seen, Nolan, and what kind of impact is this making?
Well, I mean, obviously, we're taping before the House is going to decide what it's going to do. But, I mean, clearly there was abuse of office, abuse of resources. I think the question for the House members was whether it rises, the actual abuse rises to an offense great enough to boot them out. It's a serious thing to remove an elected official, an official the people have put into office without consulting the people. So, you know, I think they're going to have to give some careful deliberation to it. I think the behavior after the offense has been really the egregious part of this, and I don't know how that's going to factor in.
Do you believe what you have heard and what you have read rises to the offense that they should be expelled?
I don't know. I think it's close. I think the offense, as I said, the offense itself, perhaps not. Perhaps censure is adequate for that. I don't know that there was a knowing, willful abuse of taxpayer resources. Perhaps there was, but I don't know if it was as so far out of line from normal practice up there that they could boot them out without setting precedent. I think the behavior in the cover-up and his bizarre actions in particular, you know, could rise to that. But I think it's a tough decision for him.
You know, yeah, it's absolutely a tough decision. But you just said some of the practices may not be out of the realm of what actually goes up there in Lansing, which I find highly disturbing because when I read through this report, and I did not read every single word of every single page.
You were using search too.
I was not using search, but I looked through there, and to me, it was the biggest example of incompetence in management of offices that I have ever really read.
Is the sort of wild card here. I think we all sort of became aware of this because of a private matter between the two of them. And this investigation, though, has unearthed, I think, a series of other issues that predate even that. I mean, the manner in which these two sort of conducted themselves as elected members of the House was inappropriate. It seems like from the beginning. They clearly didn't understand what they were doing there or what the obligation was, and just did whatever they wanted to do.
Or it didn't surround themselves with the best people for the job in terms of administrative staff.
Do that, and then this weird thing between these two offices that I mean, I can't imagine what it was like for the people who worked for them. That seems well beyond what any elected official should be doing, and I think that has to weigh into the decision about whether they should stay or go. It's not just now. It's not just about whether they misused public resources to cover up this affair. It's have they done anything appropriate as elected officials?
Yeah, but I mean,
there?
You have to put it though again in the greater context of Lansing, which has become, you know, because of term limits, a very unprofessional
a lot of people don't know what
place.
they're doing. Right.
A lot of people don't know what they're doing, and you know, a lot of their incompetence and their mismanagement isn't willful. It's just you got a whole lot of people in Lansing don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, but you say that with a straight face, and you say that very calm. But to me, and yeah, it's true. How disturbing is that? I mean, that should be disturbing.
That's why we're raising hell about term limits.
Most of all to this. All right. Well, let me ask you, Stephen, because I asked Nolan the same thing. Do you believe, from what you've heard this week in the testimony and from what you've read in that 800-plus page report, that both of them should be expelled?
Well, I don't think there's any question about Courser, and I think the House lawyer's testimony, was it yesterday or the day before, really laid out why he is not really going to be able to stay. I mean, I don't think that was questionable at all. I think Gamrat is a little more on the line there. But again, that's just looking at the conduct in the wake of this private affair and all this other stuff. That's not taking into account. I mean, the House lawyer wasn't talking about how they've conducted themselves since they've been there, and I think that, to me, is the thing that pushes both of them over. I mean, I think if the House wants to retain any sort of respect with voters around the state, you say this is not what service looks like. This is not what an elected official is expected to do, and you cannot stay here with the rest of us.
The honorable thing would have been for them both to resign, but there's not much honor in public life anymore. But I'm also
and they're both begging to keep their jobs. They really want to stay.
They do, and
you got to wonder, what is that for? What do they want to do? These
or
are not
what can they do? What can they do if they do stay?
They cannot be taken seriously by any of their colleagues. There's no way they can even as far as constituent services go. You wonder how much credibility they would have staying until next year. There is no public benefit to them staying. It is totally about them.
Well, and yet in the Senate, you also have Virgil Smith still sitting there, a guy who has gone into court and said, "Hey, I'm crazy," and no action has been taken. I mean, I think that as an institution, the legislature is really losing respect, losing credibility.
One of the things that I think pretty soon we need to talk about, and we have needed to talk about for a while, is if you're going to reform term limits, if you're going to reform the time that the legislature is there, if you're going to reform redistricting, we also need to reform the rules that govern public service in these chambers. I mean, and I'm going to beat this dead horse again. If we had had a constitutional convention when it came up,
here we go.
These are the kinds of things we could have talked about and dealt with. And I get the fear about special interests taking over that and making us talk about abortion or euthanasia or whatever the whole time. Certainly that would have been a problem, but it would also have been the proper opportunity to deal with some of this stuff, and we passed on it for I think, illegitimate reasons.
All right, two quick things before we leave Lansing conversation. One, Cindy Gamrat went back this week to her district and had a meeting, and she was faced with a lot of angry people. Do you think there's a possibility, if both of them end up staying in censure, that there could be some kind of recall effort? Let me ask you, Nolan.
Well, I would doubt it. I mean, the recall rules were tightened after the Paul Scott recall a couple of years ago, and with the election coming up now, a year off, I would say the focus will be on posting somebody, standing somebody in the primary to unseat her. I would suspect if these two do survive this, they won't survive the next election.
All right, and are we really going to talk about roads next week once this is finally?
They've been talking about
roads this week, and they seem somewhat close, and it actually seems I don't agree with the substance of the deal. I think I still think it should be all new revenue that we're committing to roads. but it's a deal, and they seem close, and they also seem to be close without some of the horse trading that I was fearful that they would be.
Well,
Last word on the deal.
In essence, it is all new revenue because there's already $400 million in the budget for roads, and so what they're proposing is to raise another $800 million through a combination of gas tax, 9-cent gas tax, $50 average hike in the registration fee. Add that to the $400 million that's already in there, and you got $1.2 billion without cutting anything else, without reprioritizing any other spending. What the worry is this Medicaid expansion under Obamacare is going to eat the budget alive over the next 5-10 years, and they're trying to build, the governor is trying to build some buffer into the budget. I don't know if that's possible.
All right, well, we'll see how far this road's proposal gets. All right, now we turn to the not far.
Awful Medicaid expansion, giving poor people health care.
Well, yeah, but you got to figure out a way to pay for it.
All right, and we will talk about that. We'll talk about that another week. We're turning now to the 2016 presidential race where Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton's campaign is having a meltdown. She's apologized for using her private email for official business when she was Secretary of State. Now Hillary's support is fading in the polls. Her numbers are down in Iowa and New Hampshire. So can she rebrand herself and get back on top? And just to give you some of those numbers in that Marist poll, that Marist NBC poll, putting Bernie Sanders above her in New Hampshire, 41% to 32%. Team Hillary, and they're like, well, we're going to reboot our campaign. And the fact that you have to reboot it this time has got to signal some serious problems, Nolan.
Well, yeah, and I don't understand really what the Democratic Party is waiting for. I mean, you've got 114 candidates on the Republican side. On the Democratic side, you've got a candidate who's clearly foundering, clearly in trouble. I don't know why it hasn't encouraged more folks into the race who could present a viable alternative. And I think at this point, given the fact that these emails are going to come trickling out from now until next November, there's still 75,000 emails left to go, or 75% of the emails left to go. I would be thinking, if I were the Democratic Party, we should have a viable alternative because you don't know what the next batch is going to show.
How big of a deal are the words, I'm sorry, and how she used them this week? Because she started last week in kind of a different way, and it ended up this week saying, I'm sorry I did that.
I wrote a column today in the Free Press that talks about how significant that is for Hillary Clinton in particular to use those words. We don't hear those words from politicians in a sincere fashion often enough. The Clintons in particular, I think, have had trouble over the history.
How sincere was she?
Those words. I think she's quite sincere. At least what she said was a genuine apology. It wasn't, hey, I'm sorry that you are offended that I did this. It wasn't, I'm sorry that this has caused.
Apology.
Yeah, no, I disagree. I think a lot of it was
it comes right out.
I'm sorry, but she still insists.
She said, I take responsibility.
She does, but she still insists she followed policy, which is absolutely untrue. If you look at
actually, that
State
is true.
Department, it is not, Steve.
It is.
The departure policy for any government official, particularly a high-ranking government official, was not followed in this case. You don't get to have your private staff members purge your email. I don't like the idea, but the State Department has said that no rules are violated. Read the policy.
But the State Department is saying that it hasn't been violated.
Of course they are, Steve, but if you read the policy, there's a very strict process that has to be followed for recovering.
She didn't follow the process for doing what she
didn't follow the policy.
So but doing what she did wasn't a violation.
I don't know. It absolutely was.
No.
And I don't understand. I mean, the things she's done, other people have been convicted of and punished for. I don't know what it is.
It's not a crime.
It's a misdemeanor. Petraeus was convicted and given 6 months probation.
That was a general, of classified stuff.
This is classified stuff.
That we don't know what level of classification this stuff has, and that's what the investigation is.
She is saying that the things were not classified when she received it.
Right.
Yeah, but she was the Secretary of State. She had no clue that this information on the North Korean nuclear program wouldn't be top secret stuff.
Yeah, look,
disingenuous,
I am not in favor of any public official using private email, and I'm not going to sit here and try to be backed into a corner defending that. At the same time, I think on the scale of wrongdoing, misconduct, this is a 5 out of 10, maybe a 4.5 out of 10. It's not the biggest thing in the world. I think it gets to a larger question, and that's why it's hurt her campaign, is that you put this in the context of the other questions about transparency and ethics that go back years with her and go back to the 2008 campaign. That is one of the things that
All right.
people
Hang on, I want to
arrogance, the entitlement.
Sure.
But if you're only focusing on the classified information and whether or not state secrets were mishandled. I mean, if you look at these emails, there's other correspondence that
should not have been on a
Well, but there's other correspondence there that make it appear that she was using her office to aid the family foundation and to aid, her to enrich her husband, doing favors for people who were donating money to the foundation, hiring him at huge fees to speak. I mean, there is a indication here that they were marketing the presidency.
All right. Well, I want to bring it back around actually more to what the Democrats are going to do and how do you solve a problem like Hillary. And hang on, I want to talk a little bit about the people who are coming off the bench who could maybe say, hey, maybe we could run in our place. Obviously Joe Biden we've talked about and he hasn't made his decision up yet, but all of a sudden they're throwing out the names of Al Gore, John Kerry, who's not maybe writing it off, and people are still pushing Elizabeth Warren. How feasible are any of those people? And then I say, hey, isn't there anybody else new that you could kind of bring in, Democrats?
Well, the numbers don't support any of those people doing better than she does. There's a couple things going on right now. One is the weakness of her particular campaign. The other is a split on the left that looks something like the split on the right between those who are wary of candidates who seem to represent the rich and rich interests, those who want to sort of stick up for working class issues. That's part of what's going on. There's also a gender problem in the Democratic Party right now that men, and particularly white men, are not supporting Hillary in the numbers that the other core constituencies of the party are, and that's what hurt her. That's what killed her in 2008. That's how Barack Obama got the nomination, and I think the worry is that the same thing could happen here. The question, though, is which of the other candidates helps you the most with those problems, and I don't know who that is. Is it Joe Biden?
She's also losing her own demographic, white women.
She's losing everywhere right now.
If you look at a Joe Biden coming in, may not, I believe, be stronger in a general election than she would. May not be as strong in a primary as he needs to be. But for goodness sakes, when you look at this party, where is its future leadership? Every name you mentioned are names from the past. People who have already tried it. People who are aged. I mean, where is the future?
Well, I think you look at someone like Martin O'Malley, who is in the race this year, but doesn't have the money to compete.
Maybe isn't the right time for
somebody
him.
Who will not. This won't be the last we've heard of him. Castro in Texas is somebody who we would almost certainly see in a presidential race sometime down the road. I mean, they're in a tweener kind of election cycle where you've got sort of older people and the younger people are too young and too unknown to really compete. That's not going to be a long-term problem, I don't think.
All right, let's turn now to Detroit and billionaire businessman Dan Gilbert. He's now rehabbing homes in the city's neighborhoods, hoping that those homes will raise property values. Gilbert is contributing $5 million to this project, and of course he already has bankrolled massive transformation of downtown Detroit. And so I guess let's take a little look at the impact that Dan Gilbert has had on Detroit. And for so long we've said, well, we've got to get neighborhoods involved, and now he's turning in that way. But how would you assess, Nolan, the overall impact that Dan Gilbert has had on Detroit in the last 5 years?
He's been the game changer, I believe. I mean, I think he came in, and not to say he started this Detroit revival, but he certainly pumped it up and gave it tremendous momentum. I think anytime you have a private investor putting his own money in and saying, I believe in this place. And the thing about him, we always had people in Detroit buying up buildings, but for the most part, they bought them up, boarded them up, and then sat there saying, well, someday they'll be worth something. Every single building he's purchased, right away he starts rehabbing and putting back in service. That's been the big difference in Detroit. His efforts have brought how many thousands of people back downtown? So there's now a critical mass of folks in the downtown area, both workers and residents.
Right.
I think it's made all the difference downtown. Now, if he's moving out in the neighborhoods, I think that's a good thing.
Is there ever a concern that one person has too much, either control or too much property or too much invested in one place?
I think that's a real concern, and I don't think that's Dan Gilbert's fault. You go back to 5 years ago when he had the press conference where he said, I'm coming downtown. the last thing he said at that press conference was, "Who's coming with me?" Right? I can't do this alone. One person can't do all of this. And he came downtown, and a couple other people stepped up a little bit. Blue Cross brought some folks down, and GM brought some more people downtown. But for the most part, no one else stepped up, and so he has fallen into this role of doing everything. And so now he's got 81 buildings in the central business district. He's in for $1.8 billion. That's not healthy for him. That's not healthy for Detroit. In the long run, we still do have to get that to be more balanced. And then, you've got all these weird sort of ripple effects of what he's doing. The beach downtown in the middle of Campus Martius is an odd duck.
People love it, though.
People love it, but what's that doing in the middle of a major American city?
But what's the point you're missing here is what it's doing is attracting a lot of people to the central city. And to me, that's an indication of what happens when it's a private initiative rather than planned out of City Hall or
I'm not criticizing. I mean, I think it's great that people are down there. I think there are some parts of this that seem strange, and
it's working.
It is working for what it's doing. The question is, how would it work in a more competitive market, which is what you would want.
The question is, is anybody being shut out? Because Dan,
I don't know.
I think we don't know the answer to that question. It's only a problem if people who want in can't get in because he's dominating. I think you do have to pay some attention to the interrelationships between his organization, his staff, and the development efforts, organizations downtown in the mayor's office. I think that may be a little too cozy.
The security thing is increasingly a transparency issue, I think.
But I think there are things you have to watch and make sure that it's a fair playing field. But I mean, remember, the Illiches have got a $2 billion project going on. When that's done, they'll be just as invested in Detroit, if not more so than Dan Gilbert. Now, it would be nice if this was broader based, but
it needs to be long term. I think we all agree.
We couldn't really afford to wait for that.
And I'm glad he didn't wait. But I do think you've got to hope that in the long term this is a broader effort and more representative of even the business community in Southeast Michigan.
Yeah. All right, turning now, finally tonight, we're going into the MiWeek game closet for one of my games. You guys ready for one of my games? It's called the Fill in the Blank game. And so I came up with a couple of things.
Game?
I invented this game. Apparently,
you were that kid.
I have a lot of time on my hands.
I've got a game to play, and you've never heard of it. Let me explain.
Couldn't we just play Uno?
No, I'd win on that. I'd count cards. All right. Here we go. Here's your first one. Stephen Colbert just took over The Late Show. My advice to him would be, Stephen, I'm going to start with you.
Be yourself, which is what he wasn't on the other show, right? He was supposed to be a character on the Colbert Report, and now he's got like a regular old talk show. I think it's such an odd translation to try to make that character that he played on the other show is so burned into people's brains. If you watch the other show, you're sort of like, well, is he still the character, or is this somebody else, and who is that guy? Because we never really saw him on the other show. So.
All right, Nolan. My advice to him would be fill in the blank.
Get a good band.
I didn't like the band they have on there, but it's okay.
Okay, you're both wrong. The answer is be the character, because that's who people love. Be the character, Stephen Colbert, because that's what people love. That's who they fell in love with. So you're both wrong on that. I win question one. Question two, the president stopped in Michigan this week pushing free two-year community college. I think his choice to announce this at Macomb Community College was fill in the blank, Nolan.
Well, I think a very good nod to Macomb, which has done an excellent job of retraining workers for the new economy, and probably one of the best community colleges in the country in that regard. In seeing this mission in an industrial county of the need to get skills to their people, to the population. And they're doing a really great job of tapping into federal grants and state grants and working with employers to train people for specific jobs, actual jobs that exist.
All right.
Great, but still sort of short-sighted. I think we've come to a place where we think education is training and nothing else. It's not for betterment and advancement of people as individuals and culture and society. It's really important that community colleges play the role that they need to in this retraining effort. But I think the focus is so narrow now that it really concerns me. I will say that I think Macomb, Nolan's right. That is one of the best examples of community college really stepping up. We need something like 75,000 new STEM workers by 2018. The community colleges are going to play a big role in providing them.
So I got to change my game, I think, for next time and make it more of like a Mad Lib where you can only put one word in, because you totally messed it up. I have 3 more fill in the blanks, and we don't have any time for it.
Maybe you were overambitious.
Never.
Again, you can't make up your own game and the rules and then not explain to us.
Yes, I can, Stephen, and that is going to do it for My Week. Head over to myweek.org right now as Nolan, Stephen, and I keep the conversation going. It's more My Week after the show. We will see you next week. Take care.
Detroit Public TV is supported by Business Leaders for Michigan, announcing open registration for the Michigan CEO Summit, November 12th at the Westin Book Cadillac Detroit. Topics include trends that could affect your bottom line and how well Michigan is doing in attracting and growing good-paying jobs. A great lineup of speakers, networking opportunities, and creative inspiration. That's the Business Leaders for Michigan CEO Summit, November 12th at the Westin Book Cadillac. Info at businessleadersformichigan.com/events. Funding is also provided by Delta,